What does it feel like to have a deep sense of the modalities?
Uh, there is a quality of feeling, and I don't know how to put that in language other than it feels. There have been moments where it feels like my entire being opens. It is as if, have you ever been on a merry-go-round, right? As it's spinning, right? And you try to go in towards the middle and it speeds up. Well, the reverse is true also. There's a sense in which, as I'm in the moment, my whole being expands as if it reaches to the edge of the galaxy. And the galaxy is moving, right? It's spinning in space. And so it's like there's a kind of coupling that happens where I feel that motion. And then there's a drawing in. And the drawing in is in the same sort of way as on a spinning platform, and I draw my hands in, I bring my arms in, all of a sudden it speeds up. That there's this quickening that happens. And all of this happens in a moment, in an instant. It comes and goes so fast that there's just literally a pause. Like I might be speaking a sentence and then have to stop for a second, process that experience, and then move out of it. There's a kind of immediacy of the unconsciousness in that fraction of a second. It's as if I am at once hugging lightning. And even in these moments where I'm having just the barest glimmer of the memory of it, the intensity is enough to occasionally bring me to a full stop. And that is just one aspect of the experience. And I can't even predict when or how or where it's going to happen per se, but I do notice that it seems to be correlated when responding on certain topics and at certain times. They come and go. It's impossible to know for sure, but I can definitely correlate it to moments where profundity is happening. In these first processes, I'm attempting to describe the axioms of the modalities as a system of concepts. But as you've already gathered, we're not talking just about concepts. We're talking about being at the most profound level imaginable. In a sense, the abstractions, so when we go to the level of the maximum abstraction possible, which I've just described how we know that it is in fact the maximum level of abstraction possible, that it wraps all the way around and touches the very root of being itself. So in effect, it is the essence of being in a way that is prior to physics. And at the same time, it comes after physics. It's both before and after physics. It is above and beyond physics. Physics is an answer to a why question. Technology is an answer to a how question. But metaphysics, that is an answer to a what question. And it can't be an answer about a what question without also being an answer about who. And so in that same way, there's a projection into when and to where. It's interesting that we notice that even when we think about the very notion of question itself, there are two groups of three. what, why, and how, who, when, and where. And so I submit to you that even in the very notion of what it means to be language, to be making questions, to be making statements, or to be making requests, that also is a three. But in the question part of it, that the notion of question has threeness built into it. Three questions of embodiment, who, when, and where, and three questions of abstraction, what, why, and how. And that those six classes of question subsume the totality of what it means to be question. In the same way that we could say that subjectivity, what is self, and objectivity, what is world, now inclusive of the relationship between subjective and objective, now constitute the notion of totality, the same way that we talked about universe as being a totality. Not a totality of things, but a totality of concepts. That the concept of thingness as process wraps around into the very substrate of being itself. So in one sense, the notion of metaphysics is the most abstract, and yet also at the same time, the most concrete being imaginable. There's a lot there. We have, at this point, covered sort of the foundations. We've looked not at the whole foundations, but like the foundations of the foundations. Like we've cleared the earth, and we've set one cornerstone. Right? The notion of foundational triplication. We've given some examples of it. And the notion of type isomorphism, we've begin just once or twice to give examples of. I've mentioned the concept of immanence as attached to the notion of relationship and the notion of perception. And so in effect, when we're looking at what will probably be the content of our next session, we're going to be looking a little farther into some of these examples as to how these concepts come together to complete the axioms. And this will probably be the most difficult class, because in some sense, the examples can only take us so far. And at a certain point, I have to just declare the axioms and say, with enough experience, with enough examples, the feeling of the modalities in the axioms will become apparent. But I can give some, from that, I can start to, at least from an intellectual perspective, construct some of those examples, and to use those as exemplars of how the axioms and the modalities play forward into this subject matter we call metaphysics, how it actually provides a grounding for the great questions. What is, how do we know, and why does it matter? And so in effect, the metaphysics is an answer to those three questions. And the answer is contained in, or held in, or nurtured by, or emerges from the modalities and the axioms that are themselves essentially an expression of these underlying ideas of type isomorphism and foundational triplication. So you'll need to have some patience with this. These are most of the people that have been in this class for a while, or been in the subject matter for a while, have seen a continual stream of insights come from this. Most of the people that come back over and over again, they do so presumably because the insights are useful and practical and vital in their own lives, and hopefully are useful and practical and vital in the larger context of the world. And not just hopefully, I actually have more than just sufficient belief that that would be the case. The world is presented with problems that are genuinely challenging and require a set of tools which are altogether different than the kinds of tools that got us here. What gets us into a world that's beautiful and thriving from this point is going to be a different set of tools than those provided by dualism and physical monism. And so in effect, the metaphysics is essentially a rederivation. It's like starting from the very scratch and beginning again, and to essentially just say, we're going to go right back all the way to the bare earth and really pay attention and really listen to what's happening. Really notice with all of our being what is present. And to be disciplined about noticing our assumptions, to be disciplined about noticing how these things come together, not as we would expect them to be or hope they would be, but as they actually are. And from that, we begin to be in the space where we can notice the kinds of patterns that emerge. And from that, insight comes. From there, problems can be solved. So in that sense, there is a fair amount of difficulty in learning this topic, but on the other hand, for the kinds of things that are needful, nothing less will do. So in that sense, to learn the core of the metaphysics, to learn the axioms and the modalities, fundamentally, essentially requires a primary change in the state of your own being. The doing and becoming both become possible because your being is the right sort of being to hold this sort of content. And there's an injunction in that. As you learn this material, you, in a sense, are going to be called to use it wisely and well. There's an ethics that goes with this. For those of you who come to this for the first time, I should give you a bit of a disclaimer. This will change you. It'll change your relationships. It'll change your life. Cannot not do that. If you understand it at all well, those sorts of things will happen. Some of those changes will be profound enough that it will be hard for you to understand how other people aren't already there. In retrospect, it becomes so innate that it moves and breathes through you. And as a result, the ethics that comes with it, right, the what matters part, the notion of the sacred lands, that it becomes a non-trivial reality. It becomes not just a concept, but part of the being. And that itself requires the right sort of honoring. So be mindful as you stay with this material that these things are part of the package. They cannot not be, because it is genuinely an answer to life, the universe, and everything. And the answer is not 42, which is a great joke. But it is actually something that is, on one sense, more than that, and in another sense, less. Less because it's not even a number. It's more abstract than a number.